Hey, good afternoon to you. It is now 4:06 News Talk 105.9 WMAL. We're making sense of the news. Coming up, 5 o'clock, John Lott is with us. He'll talk about the cost savings that comes with deporting foreign nationals who shouldn't be here in the first place. And Julie Kelly joins us at 5:30 to react to the breaking news this afternoon that the god-awful U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, Matthew Graves, has announced his long overdue resignation. We'll cover it as objectively as we possibly can. That's ahead. You can join us, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Over on CBS this weekend, Face the Nation, a reporter by the name of Jan Crawford had some thoughts about one of the most undercovered, underreported stories of the year. Take a listen to this.
Undercovered, underreported. That would be, to me, Joe Biden's obvious cognitive decline that became undeniable in the televised debate.
At the presidential debate with Donald Trump.
Unquestioned.
Unquestioned.
And, it's starting to emerge now that his advisors kind of managed his limitations. It's been reported in the Wall Street Journal for 4 years, and yet he insisted that he could still run for president. We should have much more forcefully questioned whether he was fit for office for another 4 years, which could have led to a primary for the Democrats. It could have changed the scope of the entire election. Yet, still, incredibly, we read in the Washington Post that his advisors are saying that he regrets that he dropped out of the race. You know, that he thinks he could have beaten Trump. And I think that is either delusional or they're gaslighting.
Joining us now to react, Joe Concha is here. He's a Fox News contributor, author of Progressively Worse, Why Today's Democrats Ain't Your Daddy's Donkeys. Joe, great to have you back with us, sir.
Thank you, Vince. Actually, I have a book coming out in a couple months called The Greatest Comeback Ever, Inside Trump's Big Beautiful Campaign, Unburdened by What Has Been. So we're just turning them out, baby.
I love that. In fact, I love when you release books because I just love yelling the titles out loud as we introduce you. It's a lot of fun. So, Jan Crawford, CBS reporter, I felt like this was a very revealing statement that she made. And not just because in some ways she was stating the obvious that the media should have been covering Biden's cognitive decline, but also that she seems very convinced that the media could have changed the result of the election if they only told us.
Oh, sit down, Jan Crawford. I don't want to hear this anymore, Vince, quite frankly. We heard it from Chris Cillizza, right, maybe last week. Well, as a reporter and a journalist, if I'd done more digging, I could have got to the bottom of what was really going on with Joe Biden's brain. No, all you have to do is turn on a TV, pal. If you have eyes, ears, and basic sober sanity, you'll see that he was so far gone for years.
Yes.
My first book I wrote in 2021 saying he has no business being president, let alone a golf starter, at your local county course.
Right,
so
and she says
we should have reported it. Oh, shut up!
Yeah, and she says it in this clip. She says it in this clip, Joe. She said it's obvious, she says, declares it right up front. She says it's undeniable that he has cognitive decline. And she's right. In other words, CBS didn't have to tell us that at all. They didn't have to make a point of it. Like if you turn on the television and you see the president has a peg leg, you don't need CBS to tell you that he's got a peg leg. We all see him clunking around. And this guy doesn't have the mental capacity to do the job. We all can tell. But Jan Crawford seems to be convinced that if they had only said something on CBS or ABC or any of the other establishment media outlets, then maybe Donald Trump wouldn't have won the election. What does that tell you?
That tells you that they are delusional. I heard that word used during that clip, but it's delusional. I don't care who the Democrats would have put up. The brand is broken. It's not so much the people that they run. Whoever ran as a Democratic nominee would still have to own all the DEI stuff and then playing against women in sports and obviously sky-high inflation and an open border, all of those things. Donald Trump was on the right side of the issues. That's why he won. And I know Kamala Harris was a profoundly horrible candidate, and Joe Biden's brain turned to applesauce during that debate. But let's face it, it did well before that, and everybody acted shocked when it actually happened. I don't think Democrats were winning in this cycle. People wanted change, and the brand is broken.
You know, I think it was Ben Carson who I first heard say it during the 2024 election, but that this election, the 2024 election, would be a test of the media's ability to rig it again. And I thought it was a smart point, and I watched for that throughout the election. And my sense of it, Joe, is that the establishment press does not have that power anymore. that and Jan Crawford is talking about a power that they used to have but do not now. Do you agree?
Absolutely, because you look at the numbers, Vince. For example, ABC News, right, which is run by a gal named Dana Walden. She runs the news division over there. She happens to be best friends with Kamala Harris. Literally introduced Kamala Harris to Doug Emhoff 10 years ago. They lived right next door to each other, basically, in Brentwood, California. Right now, she runs ABC News. So when Kamala becomes the nominee, ABC News does 100 stories on Kamala Harris. The first 100 anyway. And the Media Research Center found that all 100 were positive. Baghdad Bob would watch this and say, hey, aren't you guys laying it on a little thick? So despite all that pushing, and during that ridiculous debate with David Muir and Lindsey Davis, where they fact-checked Donald Trump 5 times and Kamala Harris 0 times, despite the fact that CBS tried to fact-check J.D. Vance when he actually was correctly fact-checking them and then they cut off his mic, despite all these headwinds that Donald Trump had to go against from the media, it didn't matter because legacy media doesn't have that influence, to your point, anymore. And podcasts like Joe Rogan's and radio shows like yours and Fox News, which actually has been telling the truth about Joe Biden for years, that's where the power is now.
Yeah, I've noticed, by the way, Fox's ratings are growing. And meanwhile, MSNBC and CNN are still on the decline. And again, if you're just basing it on the product, that makes total sense. To me. There was a big headline in the middle of this month that ABC News has agreed to settle a defamation lawsuit with President Trump because George Stephanopoulos brazenly lied about Donald Trump in his legal cases on the air. And he did it multiple times in the course of a single interview with Nancy Mace. ABC paid $15 million to settle that lawsuit. Since then, I've seen a bunch of lefty journalists who are angry about this. They think that this is a betrayal by ABC, that they should have Three Musketeer style kind of linked arms, and we're one for all. We all got to fight together against Trump. What do you make of this, that President Trump is succeeding in lawsuits against people who lie about him?
Yeah, lefty journalists like Brian Stelter, who apparently is an objective media critic, he was especially upset about this. But here's the bottom line. If George Stephanopoulos, during that interview with Nancy Mace, can say that Donald Trump was convicted of rape, not 1, not 3, 10 times he said this, I'm sorry, there needs to be accountability. And that is a nice warning to the media now that you just can't make up stuff anymore and lie about people and get away with it. I hope defamation lawsuits continue when it is justified. It absolutely was here. And all we hear is, well, Donald Trump's just trying to bully the media. No, he just wants the truth. That's all. Just report on him objectively. He doesn't mind tough reporting. Just make sure it's truthful. And boy, we got a long way away from that.
What do you think Donald Trump should do as a media strategy now that he's got a second chance at the White House? In the first term, he apparently spent a lot of time calling Maggie Haberman at the New York Times. He'd speak to a lot of the legacy news outlets. He clearly kind of enjoys doing that, mixing it up, especially with people who dislike him. But as far as media strategy goes, do you think he should do it again the same way he did it in round 1?
No, not so much. I think when he wants to talk to the press, he should do press conferences. We already see it. He did one just last week at Mar-a-Lago and went for more than an hour. And oh my God, he actually didn't need to call on a list of hand-picked reporters handed to him beforehand. So that was refreshing. I'd like to see Caroline Leavitt, who's the White House press secretary. I'd like to see different reporters in that White House briefing room 4 days a week. And what I mean by that, Vince, is that one day have the White House, the standard White House correspondents in there. Day 2, I just want business reporters in there asking questions about the economy. Day 3, then I want only foreign policy reporters in there asking about that. And then day 4, open it up to bloggers. They don't even have to go to Washington. You could pipe them in through the technology that we have now. And let's hear some different people asking questions because, again, I don't want to tout Fox too much, but, outside of Peter Doocy, Jackie Heinrich, and Phil Wegman is actually very good over at Real Clear Politics. No one really asked any tough questions of the White House press secretary. I'd like to see some different faces in there now. Oh, and Caitlin Collins is going back. That's good. I want to see Acosta back in there, too. He runs away when there's Democratic presidents, but let's see Jim Acosta back in the press room just so we can make I shouldn't use that word, a jackass of himself.
He'll handle that, and then we'll report on that. And as a guy who has a reporter in that briefing room, Reagan Reese covers it for the Daily Caller. She goes with some frequency, but this White House refuses to call on a Reagan Reese or the type of people who would ask these good questions that we're all looking for. Because they know it's only the TV guys, by and large. Philip Wegman has done a good job. He's kind of the exception there, but mostly just the TV guys. That's really where you get an opportunity to get a question in. I'd say as far as as we're just workshopping this idea, I do think rotating the people in that briefing room is a good idea. If it's thematically rotated or just rotate news outlets through, because, right now it's being dominated by people who really don't have the interests of the American people at heart. They're asking all sorts of very navel-gazing questions that have a lot more to do with impressing their fellow colleagues in that room than they do with actually informing the public. And that desperately needs to be fixed.
And that's the whole problem with media. It's all about getting likes and retweets from Maggie Haberman, or I don't know, getting an invite to Stephen Colbert. It used to be, hey, I want to win a Pulitzer, I want to win an Emmy, I want to win some sort of prestigious award like a Polk. And now it's just like, oh, I'm going on Colbert. It's like that's the goal. It's insane. But yeah, look, the trust in media now, it's basically on the same level as gas station sushi, and you don't want to be on the same level as media trust as far as gas station sushi is concerned.
Yeah.
I had it a couple of days ago, and it didn't go well.
Yeah, and the truth is I trust it more than I trust the media. So, I take that for what it's worth. Thank you very much. Joe Concha, always so good to talk to you. Please have an excellent New Year, sir.
Happy New Year, Vince. Take care.
Joe Concha, there he is. And by the way, I found out Joe Concha, you know where he's doing New Year's? Mar-a-Lago. He's going to Mar-a-Lago, which is pretty cool. He's going to hang out with President Trump for New Year's. I'm not doing that, but I'm going to have a good New Year's. I know that. All right. Let's see. A lot of calls coming in. I've got Lois in Purcellville, line 3, wants to weigh in on the passing of Jimmy Carter and what it was like during the Carter era. Lois, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hi, Vince. I love your show.
Thank you.
So I have managed to live through Jimmy Carter and the current administration, and both were miserable. But I remember being in my late 20s.
Sorry for laughing. It's true. I get it. I get it.
What's his face is retiring on my 75th birthday on the 16th. So I do take that as an early birthday present.
Wow. Okay. Good. Well, at least somebody's getting something good out of this.
But anyway, I remember sitting in line with 3 young children, one under the age of 1, at 4 o'clock in the morning, trying to get gas, Aline, and thinking, oh my God, what happens if I don't get it? And you can just picture it's dark, the kids are miserable, I was miserable. And then the next thing we see the sweater dress, and I was like, okay, that's great. And I also had a mortgage for 11%. So
yeah,
it is deja vu all over again with the current administration.
So it must be so when Jimmy Carter's passing, if insofar as it forces you to look back on things, it sounds like you're not really relishing your memories of the Carter era. It's like so he's passing, but now you're thinking back and you're like, boy, that was actually awful. Now that I think about it.
Yeah, and I had to say, well, and to be fair, I think he was a very kind person who should have never been president. And he was lucky enough to have 40 years to do wonderful things, be remembered kindly. And I think we should remember that. But I do also think we should remember that this is a man who had no experience at all. And that's why we had the gasoline crisis, because he had no experience internationally.
He wasn't equipped to deal with it. Yeah.
It's a lovely story, being a peanut farmer from Georgia, being the president.
Mm-hmm.
That might have been great in George Washington's time. Not so much in the 70s or it's just a crazy thing. But to be fair, at least he was a nice, kind man, and I think he tried his best.
Yeah, well, that's what they say anyway. Yeah, that's the story. That's the story they tell. It's so hard to figure out who to trust on all of this, though, because it's mostly like a lot of these establishment outlets who are like, yeah, Jimmy Carter was so kind, and when they say that, I'm like, my guess is it's probably not true. If you're insisting that's the truth, that it's probably not true, but that's okay. We'll let him go.
He did some good things. I mean, the nice thing is, I have no reason to doubt that.
Yeah,
I have every reason to doubt that Biden is kind.
Yes, you do. You absolutely have every reason to doubt that.
That's the difference. I have every reason to believe that possibly Carter had everything in his heart to be good. He just didn't have the experience. Biden only protected himself and his family with his corporate crime. So that's all. But I just want you to know, I've managed to live through both administrations and survived it.
Well, you're doing great then, Lois. I appreciate your call. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. That's
take care now. Love you. Bye.
Lois, love you too. Lois is in Purcellville. Sweet. All right, let's take a phone call. Richard calling in from Hilton Head, South Carolina, line 6. Hello, Richard. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hey, Vince, thanks for taking my call.
Yes, sir.
Hey, let's make press conferences fun again. Let's have, instead of having interns hold the mics for the questions during the press conferences, let's have Hulk Hogan or Tyrus or John Bones Jones hold them. So the next time Jim Acosta decides he wants to take a mic away from somebody, you'd have a real mic drop moment you'd never forget.
Yeah, Jim Acosta, like trying to wrench the microphone away from the intern girl at the White House. And I'm not sure if he even won that bout. If he did, it was a close one. She was a real match for her.
Yeah, he did. He got the mic away from her. And the other thing I'd like to, a couple other things, like have a soccer referee there, and if they ask a stupid question, give them a yellow card. A second one, you get a red card, and Tyrus removes you from the press conference.
Yeah, there's no shortage of big dudes who'd actually probably do that job. You just get on the phone with Dana White and have him send over a couple of the UFC dudes and just say, hey, could you clear out the press conference? And, of course, that's overkill for that room. You don't need a UFC dude to do that, but it would be funny. So that's why we're for it, Richard. Thank you, Richard, with a good idea for President Trump. We'll see what happens. You never know. It's always a surprise in the Trump administration. Tyrus shows up with a wrestling belt. America really is healing, isn't it? Coming up on the program, Joe Biden's regrets. He's got a few, a very small number. John Lott will be with us soon. Julie Kelly, it's all ahead on a 2024 edition of the Vince Coglianese Show. Hey, good afternoon to you. It's 4:35 now, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news. Coming up 5 o'clock, we're going to talk about the costs of all of this illegal immigration into our country and the savings that come with resolving it. That is, deporting people. There actually is a way to save some money in all of this. Thank goodness. We'll talk to John Lott about that at 5 o'clock. Julie Kelly is here at 5:30. We get her reaction to the resignation today of the awful U.S. Attorney Matthew Graves from the District of Columbia. And you can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Now, Joe Biden regrets at least two things about his presidency. One of them is that he resigned at all. Joe Biden, to this very day, believes he should have stayed in the 2024 race. That's what the Washington Post reported this weekend. Biden and some of his aides still believe he should have stayed in the race, despite the rocky debate performance and low poll numbers that prompted Democrats to pressure him to drop out. Biden and these aides have told people in recent days that he could have defeated Trump, according to people familiar with their comments, who spoke on the condition of anonymity to describe private conversations. Aides say the president has been careful not to place blame on Harris or her campaign. He's been very careful not to do that. So Biden is living under a delusion. So in case you want more evidence that his mind doesn't work, look no further than the delusion that had I only stayed in the race, I would have won. No, you would not have. You would have lost, perhaps by an even bigger margin, if that's possible, than Kamala Harris. Biden is a disaster, and the voters had assessed it that way. And they used Kamala as a stand-in when they made that assessment. It was, the vote against Kamala is as good as the vote against Biden. But Biden, to this day, thinks he should have stayed in the race. Now, that is also another clear sign that Biden didn't come to that decision on his own to get out. If he is of the mind, and his, quote, aides, the people who are closest to him, are of the mind that, he would have won if he had only stayed in, or should have stayed in, we should have stayed in, then Biden didn't make the decision to get out. That wasn't his decision. That's what this story is telling you. That he was forced out by Democrats. That Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and Barack Hussein Obama got involved. They threw the hook around the guy and they yanked him off stage. He's done. He's out. So Biden regrets resigning the office. Resigning, meaning I'm not going to run for it anymore. I'm not going to do it anymore. I'm done. This will be the end for me. That's a resignation. So Biden resigned as president of the United States. And now he regrets it, says the Washington Post, because he doesn't want to say it, but Kamala sucked. Kamala was so bad that even I could have been better, says Joe. Even I, who can't string a sentence together. Additionally, what else does Joe Biden regret? Well, it's not the state of the economy. It's not the state of the border. It's not all of the fentanyl deaths. It's not the 13 Americans who were lost in Afghanistan. It's not any of the brand new wars that broke out under his presidency. It's not any of those things. No, what he regrets is that he picked Merrick Garland to be the United States Attorney General. Now, can you believe this? That of all the things that he might regret, it's picking Merrick Garland. Why would he regret that? Garland engineered historic prosecutions of political opponents for Joe Biden against his political opponents, against Republicans, against January 6th people. I started the program today, and we'll continue as we get to 5:30 here with Julie Kelly, but talking about U.S. Attorney Matthew Graves from the District of Columbia. Matthew Graves, as he announces his resignation today, is bragging that the single largest investigation in the United States Department of Justice history was targeted against Trump voters. We went after Trump voters. We went after them aggressively. No investigations ever spent more money and resources doing it. We've made their lives miserable, drove some of them to suicide. Couldn't be prouder. That's the Matthew Graves approach. That's the United States Department of Justice approach. That's what was done under Merrick Garland. Garland oversaw multiple lunatic prosecutions of Donald Trump at the federal level under Jack Smith. That's Merrick Garland's tenure, looking to destroy Joe Biden's political opponent, to weigh him down so much under the weight of federal prosecutions that he could never become president of the United States. And yet, of course, Trump prevailed in the face of all of that. Trump benefited from it in ways that neither Merrick Garland nor Jack Smith nor Joe Biden certainly could have anticipated. The American public rallied to Trump's side in the face of this abuse. Every time Trump stepped in front of a microphone outside of a New York City courthouse, he grew in his support. That's not what Merrick Garland and company thought was going to happen. So why does Biden regret tapping him to be the attorney general if he was such a loyal hatchet man to the Biden agenda? Well, here's what the Washington Post says today. In private, Biden has also said he should have picked someone other than Merrick Garland as attorney general, complaining about the Justice Department's slowness under Garland in prosecuting Trump and its aggressiveness in prosecuting Biden's son, Hunter, according to people familiar with his comments. All right, let's start with part one. We'll get to Hunter in a moment. But let's just start with he's angry about the Justice Department's slowness in prosecuting Trump. What is that? What does that tell you about what he thinks Merrick Garland should have done? It's about as explicit as it gets. You should have hurt my political opponent more quickly. You shouldn't have dragged it out. Remember, when did all the prosecutions come? All the federal prosecutions came down in the final year, election year. The calculus in the Justice Department was crystal clear. If we prosecute Trump in the midst of the election year, it'll be fresh on the mind of voters. And regardless of whether or not we prevail in court, we can damage him in the court of public opinion, and Joe Biden can win the presidency again. That's why Jack Smith and company saved all of this for late 2023 through 2024. That's why. That's why. They pretended as they went through court filing after court filing that the election had no bearing on any of this, and yet we're in an all-out sprint to finish it before the election because it was, quote, in the public interest. It's election meddling. It's election interference. It's abuse of power. It's corruption. It's political hatchetry. And that's what Merrick Garland's DOJ has been doing. So Biden's angry that they didn't hurt Trump more quickly. Why didn't you get to it right away? That's Biden's beef. And they continue here in this Washington Post report, had the Justice Department moved faster to prosecute Trump for allegedly seeking to overturn the 2020 election and mishandling classified documents, they say, the former president might have faced a politically damaging trial before the election. They're not even hiding it. How many times were we served with things like, oh, this is completely independent, the Justice Department's independent, it has nothing to do with politics, this is just justice is blind, and nobody is above the law. They sold you on all of this holier-than-thou horse crap, when, in fact, the only disagreement was, when do we hurt Trump to maximize the pain? That was the only disagreement. It wasn't, should we hurt Trump? It was, what will be the best for our PR? And Biden world is upset that the Justice Department didn't start a little bit earlier so that Trump could be in what the Washington Post refers to as a, quote, politically damaging trial before the election. Disgrace. Disgrace. This entire presidency and all of the officials who've carried the water of this corruption, to include Merrick Garland. So Biden regrets tapping Merrick Garland to run the Justice Department because he's angry that Merrick Garland didn't harm his political opponent more, didn't get him inside of a courtroom ahead of the election in order to create a, quote, politically damaging trial before the election. Man, oh man. So now that the election's over, of course, the Washington Post is willing to be candid with you about what the goals here were. Now, Hunter Biden, that's the other piece of this. Apparently, Biden is upset with the, quote, aggressiveness in prosecuting his son. I don't know what in the world he's talking about. It's like the whole thing is ridiculous for a number of reasons, but among them is that under the U.S. Attorney David Weiss, who was tasked with this particular investigation, they had engineered, Merrick Garland's Justice Department had engineered an all-time sweetheart deal for Hunter. It was designed to absolve him of any crime he may have committed over a very extensive time period. This is way before Joe Biden did it himself and gave him an 11-year pardon, which, by the way, he could have done at any point if he wanted to take the heat off of Hunter. And the Justice Department was using Hunter as a sort of fig leaf to pretend like they had equal, they were conducting themselves equally on both sides of the political aisle. So as they were persecuting Trump and his supporters at unspeakable, unseen levels, they pretended like they were giving Hunter Biden a hard time because justice is blind. Remember, that was the old holier-than-thou routine that they were playing with you. But meanwhile, behind the scenes, wrapped in legalese, they were offering Hunter Biden the sweetheart deal to end all sweetheart deals. And if it weren't for a federal judge by the name of Mary Ellen Noreika, it would have gone through. But she intercepted it. And actually, I'll take one step further back and say, if it weren't for the IRS whistleblowers, Judge Mary Ellen Noreika would not have had her radar up for this. The IRS whistleblowers came out and they said, we've never seen anything like this. We've never seen the amount of protection that's being given to the Biden family in the United States government on any other tax investigation. We look into taxes all the time. These guys were career tax investigators. They were looking into tax crime forever, and they had never encountered the stonewalling that they were encountering inside of Biden's federal government. That there were special protections being carved out to protect Joe from scrutiny as they came upon damaging materials about Joe Biden's involvement. Nope, can't talk about dad, can't talk about the big guy. Hunter Biden had every protection in the world. They were about to conduct various investigative maneuvers, including going to storage facilities and pulling the paperwork. They have warrants for this. And what they would do is, or to investigate all of Hunter Biden's business partners, to question them. And what would happen? Well, each time somebody within the United States Department of Justice would give Biden world a heads up that it was coming. And so they had time to warn all of the people who would be questioned, and they had time to clear out the storage unit before it was investigated. Now, nobody else in America would be able to get away with that. The Bidens did, with heavy assists from the Justice Department to help make that happen. Like, what? Biden's angry at Merrick Garland? He had the perfect arrangement with Garland. They could pretend like Hunter Biden was really suffering under the weight of the Justice Department, and meanwhile, Hunter Biden was getting every advantage that no other person on earth would ever get from the DOJ. And so the idea that, like, oh, Hunter Biden was getting a raw deal, please spare us. And then in the end, just to give you a clear understanding of just how duplicitous all of this is, Joe Biden pardoned Hunter for 11 years of crimes either charged or not even known to the public. 11 years. The DOJ prosecutions didn't even go back 11 years. They were nowhere close to 11 years old. But Joe, in an effort to protect himself and his entire family from criminal scrutiny, because they deserve it, gave Hunter an 11-year pardon. Lastly, if there were no Justice Department investigations ever publicly announced about Hunter, how could Joe justify an 11-year pardon for his son? He just gave his son an 11-year pardon. Can you imagine a world where Merrick Garland and company didn't have anything going on with Hunter? They didn't have any investigation. They never opened an inquiry. There was never a leak. There was no issue about a gun. There was no issue about taxes. Nothing had ever been exposed in public. None of it. And Joe's exit strategy is, I got to give him an 11-year pardon? For what? Why would you do that? It'd be even more cartoonish in the end. So at the very least, Merrick Garland gave him a thin pretext to say, oh, well, I got to give him a pardon. I got to give him a pardon. He's being criminally scrutinized. He doesn't deserve it. That's my son. Leave my son alone. It's amazing. So Biden, out of all the things he could possibly regret, which he should have a lot of regret, he should be racked with regret. Biden should exit with his head hung in shame from the White House. And his regrets are that I didn't stay in the race, that I allowed Nancy Pelosi to strong-arm me out. Nancy Pelosi. I just laugh at the idea of her strong-arming anything. And having Merrick Garland run the United States Department of Justice. Oh, I left out one other Justice Department thing that worked to Biden's advantage. The Robert Hur investigation. When it came out that Joe Biden had stolen classified documents from the United States government, both as a senator and vice president of the United States, and then hid them away in various office spaces around the country, including leaving it out inside of the garage next to his ancient Corvette. Like, Robert Hur came out and said, well, it's fine. We're not going to prosecute him because his brain is a broke. She's a no good, as Chris Plant might say. It's what? How could you regret Merrick Garland? Merrick Garland gave you everything you could possibly want. Merrick Garland was Joe Biden's Santa Claus, constantly delivering under that tree throughout his entire administration. And Biden has no gratitude whatsoever for that, because Biden's upset that he didn't crush Trump earlier to make it more likely that Biden could win the election, and that he hassled Hunter at all, despite the fact that he didn't really hassle him. He only pretended to.
Hey, Vance, Happy New Year to you.
Likewise.
So my question is Biden going to pardon himself?
What do you think, Mary?
Probably.
I think there's a non-zero chance of that. And, Jonathan Turley actually wrote at one point that, yes, a president can pardon himself. So the power apparently exists, which means Joe Biden is set to abuse it. That seems likely. Thank you, Mary. I appreciate that call, that question. Hey, coming up on the program, John Lott will be here. We'll talk about getting the nation's illegal immigration problem under control and how much money we could save by doing it. And Julie Kelly talks to us about that out-of-control Justice Department. It's all ahead.